It is great to see you all here for today's presentation. If you can see in our screen, you will have language interpretation, both in Spanish and in Portuguese. So Zoom is very easy to use, but here you have the instructions for you to have the presentation in your own language. Remember that today we will be recording this presentation. This is going to be in IGA's YouTube channel for you to check in the future or to share with some colleagues, other families, patients. And everybody's now in their own channel. Well, today the thing is going to be like this. First, Dr. Pramod Mistry will give us a 40-minute presentation. He will talk about Lip Studio. And after that, this presentation will be followed by a questions and answer session, okay? All the time in the presentation, the question and answer button is going to be open. So if questions came whenever they came, you can write them down. We will try to answer everything here in presentation, but if time isn't enough, then we can send you these answers via email because Dr. Mistry will keep those questions and answer you in the following days. So is now everybody in their channel? Okay, remember this presentation is going to be a 60-minute webinar. Right now, I would like to introduce you to our main presenter, Dr. Mistry. He's a favorite of the house. I myself love him so much. We own him a lot as a community. Thank you, Dr. Pram, for being here. And let me tell you about him. Dr. Pramod Mistry, or Pram, is a professor of medicine and pediatrics at Yale University School of Medicine. He graduated MD PhD from the University of London and rose through the ranks to become an honorary consultant and senior lecturer in medicine and founding director of the Royal Free Hospital, Supra-Regional Center for Gaucher disease. For the past 30 years, Dr. Mistry has been dedicated to advancing the care of Gaucher disease patients through cutting-edge research. He has helped build centers for Gaucher disease worldwide and is the chairman of Project HOPE, Humanitarian Program for Gaucher disease, and the International Gaucher Disease Registry, ICGG. His lab has made sustained contributions toward discovering biomarkers, understanding mechanisms of Gaucher disease, and the genetic underpinning of highly variable patterns of type 3 Gaucher disease. He sees Gaucher patients in 3 locations in New York and Connecticut. Thank you very much, Dr. Mistry, for being here tonight. And the microphone is all yours.
Thank you, Paulina, for such a lovely introduction. You know, today we meet at a very somber time in the world, and we are a community, and we have friends, loved ones in Israel. And I just want to begin this today by saying that my prayers and thoughts, all of our prayers and thoughts, are with members of our community in Israel. So I'm going to share my screen. And so okay. So the topic we are going to be talking about is the Leap to Mono Venglustat trial. And when we develop a medicine that really works and which is safe, it has to be built on solid scientific foundations, some idea of the safety of the medicine, and real evidence that the medicine really does what we would like it to do. And the first thing is we look at how the medicine works in mice with Gaucher disease type 3, and then do studies in the laboratory, and then do studies that are called phase 2 clinical trials, where everybody receives the medicine and there is no blind treatment. And so these are my disclosures. I'm a principal investigator in Leap to Mono trial. I'm a professor at Yale School of Medicine, as Paulina mentioned. I also receive a research grant from Sanofi Genzyme. So members of our community really don't need an introduction to Gaucher disease. And we know that Gaucher disease is due to a deficiency of the enzyme acid beta glucosidase, or GBA. And when that is deficient, the lipid called glucosylceramide, that is a sugar, glucose, that's linked to a special kind of lipid called ceramide, which is made up of a fatty acid, and another lipid called sphingosine. That lipid, glucosylceramide, sometimes called GL1, builds up in the cells. This lipid is very important for cells, a bit like cholesterol. And so there is an enzyme that forms that lipid as well. And that enzyme is called glucosylceramide synthase. And in healthy cells, there is an equilibrium between the rate of production of glucosylceramide and its ability to degrade glucosylceramide as it is generated as cells turn over in the body. And so when this enzyme, acid beta glucosidase, is low in Gaucher disease, this lipid builds up in parts of the cell called lysosome, shown on the left-hand side. And so then you have accumulation of this lipid material, and that shows itself as a Gaucher cell, shown on the right-hand side. And it has a very wrinkled paper, wrinkled tissue paper appearance. That is because the lysosomes are engorged with the lipid.
Sorry, Pram. We can only see your first slide. Could you please just swap them over, the presentation view?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
It's not a problem.
Forgive
Thank you.
me. Let me just rearrange my... so sorry. Okay, I need to just stop share and start again.
That's all right.
Thank you. Thank you for... Okay. I think this should work now. Okay. Can you see this slide?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Angel. So when this Gaucher enzyme is low in the body, and the name of this enzyme is acid beta glucosidase, this lipid, which is made up of glucose, and ceramide, which is made up of a fatty acid, and sphingosine, builds up in the cells, in part of the cells called the lysosome, shown here. This lipid is very important, much like cholesterol. And so cells have an ability to make this lipid, starting with the building blocks. And the enzyme that does that is called glucosylceramide synthase. In healthy cells, there is an equilibrium or balance between the rate of synthesis of the glucosylceramide and its degradation via the Gaucher enzyme shown here. And so when the Gaucher lipids build up in the cells of the body, in people who are affected with Gaucher disease, these cells are present in all organs. These are macrophages that are filled with the lysosome, and you can see the cytoplasm of the cell is very abnormal because it is engorged with lysosomes that contain the lipid. And it is these cells and other cell types that are filled with this lipid that are the bad actors in Gaucher disease. And they are the ones that cause all the symptoms of Gaucher disease, such as bone pain, bone crisis, and large spleen and liver, and so on. Again, members of our community do not need any introduction to Gaucher disease. But today we are going to be talking about type 3 Gaucher disease, shown here in blue. And so brain health is affected in type 3 Gaucher disease. And it can manifest itself in a variety of ways, like autism, for example, or difficulty with memory, and so on, or visual spatial cognition. It can affect eye movements so that smooth movement of the eye from here to here in a coordinated fashion is disrupted, so that there is a looping upwards of the eyeball as it moves. And so in the beginning, it is just looks like a squint. But as time goes on, the eyes can just become fixed and no longer can move. And what that leads to individuals doing is having to move their head completely to follow an object. And it can lead to severe, almost tremor-like appearance of the head as individuals try to follow and track objects. So type 3 Gaucher disease is also called subacute neurological type. So here, the neurological symptoms are milder than the most devastating type of Gaucher disease, which is type 2. And that affects little babies and sadly leads to death within the first 1 or 2 years of life. Type 3 Gaucher disease is a less severe variety of neurological disease, but it is associated with the most severe type of liver, spleen, and bone manifestations. The world literature is primarily focused on type 1 Gaucher disease, and this is the one where there is no early childhood manifestations of neuronopathic disease that we see in type 3. So this is a study by Dr. Tilki Samanska from Poland, together with colleagues in the ICGG registry, that analyzed about 300 patients in the registry with type 3 Gaucher disease. And you see all this medical terminology to try and map out or develop a picture or a clinical spectrum of how brain health is affected in Gaucher disease. To put it simply, type 3 Gaucher disease starts with the most severe form of liver and spleen involvement, low blood counts, bone disease. And we, of course, have very effective enzyme replacement therapy that restores these manifestations to normal. And in the olden days, these children used to die in childhood, but now these individuals are living into teenage years, young adulthood. Along the way, they develop the first subtle signs of neurological disease. And the sign that I showed you, inability to move smoothly to the right or the left to track objects, is affected, and we call it saccade. Around this time, they also develop signs of impaired milestones. And a number of individuals that I take care of exhibit autism, and in fact, they are extremely high functioning. I have one young man who has an IQ of 140 with intellectual capacity that is in the stratosphere, but they are quite disabled by autism and other manifestations of Gaucher disease. This then leads to difficulty in smooth movements, coordination, ability to take care of themselves, and sometimes it is so severe that they are confined to wheelchair. And the most devastating end-stage manifestation of type 3 Gaucher disease is unrelenting seizure activity, which is very difficult to control. So this is the natural course of type 3 Gaucher disease. And our goal is to stop this disease in its track right at the beginning so that the brain health is preserved and people can lead normal lives. So I'm not going to be talking about a lot of complicated science, but this is one of my very few slides to help you understand a very important concept in Gaucher disease. Because Gaucher disease is not just the accumulation of the fatty substance that I talked about. What it is an inflammatory disease. And so when this Gaucher lipids build up, it activates all of the arms of the immune system, T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, plasma cells. These are the same cell types that are activated when you have a flu infection or COVID infection. But the difference in Gaucher disease is there is no infection. This is all driven by the Gaucher lipid. Therefore, we call it sterile inflammation. What this activation of immune system does, it leads to the production of antibodies. Just like as we develop antibodies to flu or COVID. But these antibodies are not to a virus. They are antibodies to the Gaucher lipid. One of the effects of these antibody and antigen complexes, when these antibodies bind the Gaucher lipids, then it activates complement system and it generates a fragment of the complement called C5a. And one of the effects of C5a is that it goes back into the tissues and searches out the Gaucher cells, and there is a receptor for C5a. And when that interaction takes place, one of the downstream effects, paradoxically, is that it increases the production of glucosylceramide synthase. This is the enzyme that is involved in making the Gaucher lipid. So we have a positive feedback loop that on the one hand, we have low enzyme, it is leading to the buildup of the Gaucher lipid. And because of the inflammation, the cells are making more Gaucher lipid, and that leads to a feed-forward positive loop. And so we have two types of treatment. One is to give the enzyme back to the Gaucher cells, or we slow down the activity of this enzyme called glucosylceramide synthase. And that is a treatment that we call substrate reduction therapy, or SRT. And so in healthy cells, there is an equilibrium between the rate of synthesis or production of glucosylceramide and its rate of degradation. And so healthy cells have to have that equilibrium, okay? In Gaucher disease, there's too much of a production of the lipid that overwhelms the deficient enzyme activity, and so the lipid is building up. When we give enzyme, it goes to the Gaucher cells and therefore achieves a new equilibrium. With substrate reduction therapy, it slows down the production of the lipid to balance the residual enzyme activity, achieving a new balance or a homeostatic state. Enzyme replacement therapy is targeted to macrophages in the body, but we know that many other cell types are involved, like the immune cells that I just described. Substrate reduction therapy is a small molecule which has a molecular weight of 250 compared to molecular weight of ERT, which is 250,000. And what that means is that the substrate reduction therapy can get to all parts of the body where there is disease. And substrate reduction therapy has the potential to cross the blood-brain barrier. The first generation SRT actually does not cross the blood-brain barrier, but it gives us enormous insight into whether this type of treatment is a good treatment option for patients with Gaucher disease. And so this is the schematic to show that this is the lipid GL1. It is made by the enzyme GL1 synthase or glucosylceramide synthase, and it's degraded by the Gaucher enzyme called glucosylceramide into glucose and ceramide. And when this enzyme is low, because of mutations in GBA1, these lipids build up, GL1. And the cell tries to get rid of the lipid by converting this lipid, by removing the fatty acid shown here, to form the lyso-GL1. And of course, the cell can get rid of the lipid, but sadly, this is the bad actor. This is the one that causes all of the bad effects of Gaucher disease. We also know that lyso-GL1 now is a biomarker, and we can measure levels of it in blood to get an idea about the status of Gaucher disease. And so these lipids build up in the cells, shown here in the macrophages, and that leads to ill health in the body with big liver, spleen, failure to thrive, and some issues with brain health or symptoms that I described. Substrate reduction therapy is to slow down the production by inhibiting this enzyme, a partial inhibition of this enzyme, not a complete inhibition. And when that is performed, we get reduction of glucosylceramide synthesis to balance the rate of degradation, and that treatment reverses the effects of Gaucher disease. And so in type 3 Gaucher disease, it is a life-threatening disease. This is a young child that I saw together with Dr. Golodny and Dr. Grabowski one day, and he was so dangerously ill. You can see that this child has life-threatening disease with very big liver, shown here, very big spleen. The child is anemic, has severe failure to thrive. And soon after we saw this baby started enzyme replacement therapy, and look at him at the age of 14 years. So enzyme replacement therapy has been life-saving for children with type 3 Gaucher disease, but it is only part of the treatment, because over time, enzyme therapy does not get to the brain, and it can lead to neurological complications and chronic neurological disability at relatively young age. And so, as you know, there are two types of treatment: enzyme replacement therapy, where the idea is to replace the deficient enzyme by targeting it to the macrophage by ERT. And the other treatment is to give an inhibitor of this enzyme, Venglustat. And here is shown Venglustat, which is a first generation substrate reduction therapy. And these technical numbers, IC50, refer to the fact that this is specific. It is not inhibiting other enzymes. And the earlier version of SRT, Venglustat, was notorious for inhibiting many different enzymes in the body, and it caused a lot of side effects. So when we are thinking about developing a medicine for improving brain health in type 3 Gaucher disease, it is always very helpful to see if the principle of treatment, the substrate reduction therapy that we are talking about, has been shown to be effective in other settings of Gaucher disease. And in that way, we are very fortunate because we have a lot of evidence over 14, 15 years of clinical trials from the Venglustat trial. And this is Engage clinical trial that I had the privilege to lead. And this is a phase 2 trial. And in both these studies, the only treatment that individuals with very severe Gaucher disease had was just the pill. They took it once a day or twice a day. And you can see that there is dramatic reversal of liver volume, spleen volume, and improvement of blood counts, platelets, and hemoglobin. And that is happening in the setting of just having the pill. In many ways, this kind of data truly surprised very experienced physicians in the field, because people believe that first you have to give enzyme, achieve stability, and then you go in with a pill as a maintenance therapy. And what we have now learned is that the pill is a good alternative to enzyme replacement therapy, and you can expect as rapid and as great responses that we see with every 2-week enzyme replacement therapy. And we now have patients for more than 10 years receiving this treatment and doing well all over the world. So that brings me to something that I must say I feel not very proud about, which is that we have had a very European-centric view of Gaucher disease, and 95% of the world literature is focused on type 1 Gaucher disease, and the most common mutation for that is N370S. What we've learned is, in fact, there are at least 10 times more patients in the rest of the world that have type 3 Gaucher disease, and that is due to this variant called L44P. And having 2 copies of L44P guarantees that child at some point is going to develop neurological disease. And over the years, sadly, we have overlooked this population of patients, but we can start anew and say, we are not going to leave anyone behind. And hence the LEAP clinical trial to improve brain health in type 3 Gaucher disease. Now, when we want to develop a good and a safe treatment for a condition like type 3 Gaucher disease, there are 7 steps that have to be conducted, and that is something that can take up to 10 or even 14 years of development. So it requires long-term commitment by the sponsor, but also long-term commitment by the patient community as well as the treating doctors. And so the first thing is we need to understand the science behind how Gaucher lipids damage the brain using mouse models to see how their brain health is affected by inducing Gaucher disease. Second, we need a medicine that actually gets into the brain. Third, we need to show that the medicine is effective in other types of Gaucher disease, and that is why I shared the results with type 1 Gaucher disease and the Venglustat or Sodelga clinical trials. Fourth, we need to understand the effect of the medicine in a Gaucher mouse. And I'm going to describe each of these steps in my next few slides. The most important factor is safety. It's no use having a medicine that works if it has got a lot of side effects. And we need to understand short-term side effects as well as long-term side effects. And we are actually very fortunate with Venglustat that we have a lot of data on this particular topic. And then we need to be able to do a phase 2 clinical trial, which I will describe, where you give the medicine to everybody that you have selected. It could be a dozen people, a couple of dozen people, and see the effect of it in brain health, with respect to brain health. And most importantly, make sure that it is safe and it is well tolerated. So we've accomplished all of these foundational goals, and we are now in the final stretch, and that is a phase 3 clinical trial, which is the placebo-controlled, double-dummy, double-blind clinical trial of type 3 Gaucher disease, and it is called LEAP tomorrow. So we need to understand how the Gaucher, when there is Gaucher gene defect, how is the brain affected? And so the brain is an extremely complicated organ. This is just the mouse brain. And a single mouse brain contains 70 million neurons. And it is not just the neurons. There are other cells called astrocytes and microglia that are very important to maintain the function of the neurons. And these glia outnumber neurons by 10 to 1. And so you can imagine how complex the processing of lipids goes on in the brain. And we are able now to generate, using new technology, mouse models that help us to understand the function of Gaucher genes in the neurons, as well as the immune cells of the brain called the microglia, as well as the astrocytes, which are the cells that provide nourishment to the neurons. And we can use this very complex new technology called single cell resolution to understand how the Gaucher defect affects each of these cell types in different parts of the brain. So I'm not going to show you a lot of scientific data, because I know that this evening you're not interested in that. But this is the summary of hundreds of experiments that my team worked very hard over the pandemic to generate. And what we learned is that when there is Gaucher disease that is active in the brain, amazingly, there's inflammation in the brain, much like what I just described to you in type 1 Gaucher disease. And it involves macrophages, it involves microglia, and it involves a special kind of immune cells called NKT cells. And this inflammation is driven by the Gaucher lipids. And when there is inflammation in the brain, it causes damage to the neurons and the neurological signs. And what we've learned is that these immune cells called the microglia are very important kind of gatekeepers for maintaining brain health. And so when we restore the Gaucher gene in the microglia, then we can slow down the damage and this vicious cycle, and it reduces the damage to the neurons. And what we've learned is that a Venglustat type of inhibitor, GCS inhibitor, can completely abrogate these pathways and restore the function of the neurons and the brain health. What we learned is that it is the Gaucher lipids that are the culprit, and they stimulate immune cells in the brain, causing inflammation in the brain. This causes malfunction and damage to neurons. And moreover, we can even monitor what is going on inside the brain by these biomarkers. And this is a biomarker called neurofilament light that we discovered, and that is released from damaged neurons, and it can appear in blood. So we are in an exciting time when we might be able to take just a blood sample and that will open the window into what is going on as far as brain health is concerned. There's another protein which we think is a big player, which is called ApoE, and also the Gaucher lipids can give us good information about what is going on in the brain as far as brain health is concerned. And what we've learned from these studies is that if we slow the production of Gaucher lipids, it improves brain health. So this is the molecule that I'm talking about. It is called Venglustat, and it is able to cross the blood-brain barrier and go to the cells of the brain, and it will reduce the production of glucosylceramide and improve the harmful consequences that arise due to the low enzyme activity and the buildup of the lipid. So type 3 Gaucher disease is very, very diverse, and there is a huge spectrum. Some people, as I said, just have autism and eye movement problems. At the other extreme are sadly individuals who are disabled with seizures or just cannot move independently because of difficulty in balance. And I think that we are entering an era where there will be biomarkers that we will be able to identify onset of neurological damage before the onset of symptoms. And so I envision a time when we will be able to identify earliest signs of brain involvement before the child or a young person starts to show eye signs or difficulty in coordination or develop seizure activity. And so I promise you this is the last technical slide I will show you. But I mentioned that one of the goals in the 7 steps to develop medicine is to show that it actually helps mice with type 3 Gaucher disease. And these are the mice with type 3 Gaucher disease, and they live for only 20 to 30 days. But when we put them on the Venglustat type of medicine that crosses the blood-brain barrier, they can live quite healthily. What we learned also is that this biomarker, neurofilament light chain in blood, can very accurately track the brain health in these mice. And so we have a very, very promising biomarker, and moreover, the same thing with glucosylsphingosine. What we learned is that immune infiltration or immune activation and inflammation that occurs in type 3 Gaucher disease is significantly reduced by this Venglustat medicine as shown here. And the microglia, which are reduced, and they are the kind of housekeeping cells to keep the brain neurons healthy, they have really been destroyed, but they now recapitulate and they are functioning normally. So that brings me to the phase 2 trial. And this was a clinical trial of 11 adults over the age of 18. They had diagnosis of type 3 Gaucher disease. They had been on enzyme for a long period of time and had achieved very good effects, as I showed you in the earlier picture. But they had quite severe effects of type 3 with neurological symptoms. And they had been on enzyme and achieved therapeutic goals. So they continued on Cerezyme every 2 weeks. And we added this medicine called Venglustat, which is the SRT that goes into the brain. With any medicine, first and foremost priority for us is to make sure that it is safe, and secondly, that it is tolerable. And then you want to be able to show that it is really doing the thing that we expect it to do, that the Gaucher lipids are reduced in the fluid surrounding the brain that we obtain by spinal tap and also in blood. But then to do a number of studies to make sure that all of the other aspects of Gaucher disease are remaining stable. And so 11 patients were recruited. We analyzed them at 26 weeks and at the end of first year, and they've all continued long-term just on Venglustat. So the first thing to see is the medicine getting to the brain? And in this slide is shown data on blood sampling after Venglustat is given, and also a sample of spinal fluid taken by spinal tap. And this is the fluid that surrounds and bathes the brain. And what you can see is that Venglustat is appearing in the spinal fluid exactly as it is appearing in plasma. So if the medicine is getting to the brain, that is very important thing to demonstrate right at the beginning. Then you want to see, is it doing what we expect it to do? And what we found is that in the spinal fluid that is surrounding the brain in CSF, there was a reduction of the Gaucher lipids, glucosylceramide and glucosylsphingosine, in 10 out of 11 patients. The Gaucher lipids also fell in blood, and that was a surprise in a way, because after patients have been on treatment for 10, 20, sometimes 25 years, you wouldn't really expect any more improvement, but we did see an improvement in the Gaucher lipids. This is a test that we do to scientifically grade how severe coordination is. It is called the SARA test. It is the scale for assessment and rating of ataxia. Ataxia is just a technical word of lack of coordination, handling spoon and fork, or feeding oneself, and so on, writing. And higher the score, the worse is this incoordination. And you can see at baseline, this patient had quite high score, and at 6 months, it fell to 1, and at 12 months, this person was normal. And we pretty much see the same trends in most other patients. 3.5, within 6 months, there was no tremor or incoordination, and that was maintained at 12 months, and so on. So this is an objective way, because it's not enough just to show that the medicine is going to the brain and it is lowering the biomarkers. We really want to be able to show that the patient is functioning better. This is what's called patient-reported outcomes, and this falls in that broad domain. This is a very simple test called the trail making test, and it's all in a lot of the puzzle books and so on. But actually, it allows us to capture very sophisticated understanding of how the different neuronal networks are connected. So you have visual, spatial, and coordination, everything that you can capture by this simple trail making test. And higher it is, so it takes individuals a long time to complete the trail making test. That's not good. And you can see at 12 months, there is an improvement. And a lot of these individuals showed a very nice improvement over time. Okay, so this is called trail making test. And we were also able in this study to look at the brain using functional MRI. And the advantage of this kind of approach is that you can look at connectivity between different parts of the brain. And these resting state neuronal networks, 1, 2, and 3, allow us to capture perception, vision, cognition, language, orthography, cognition, and space. And the neuronal network 6, 7, and 8 allow us to capture how we sense our environment, auditory sensation, and executive control. And what we found is that after 12 months, patients showed widespread and robust strengthening of connections between the occipital, which is at the back, and the parietal, which is around the earlobe, just underneath the earlobes, parietal structures, and the frontal and the temporal and the limbic targets. And the limbic targets are the part of the brain that controls emotion. Remember, I talked about the autism aspect. And so we were able to capture these kind of resting state neuronal networks shown here using functional MRI. And you can see that this is an improvement. The more yellow it is, the better connections there are. And this is also a reflection of what we call RSN matrices that show very good correlation. And so the Venglustat, when combined with hemagglutinates in the phase 2 trial, showed favorable safety and tolerability profile. There were no severe adverse events. All patients have continued into long-term extension study. Most adverse events were mild or moderate and not related to treatment. And the only complaint was headache after spinal tap that occurred in 6 patients. So we are very fortunate also in a way that in another disease setting, Venglustat has been used in hundreds of patients. This is the MOSE-PD study of Parkinson's disease, where individuals were carriers of Gaucher disease. They did not have Gaucher disease, and 111 were on placebo and 110 were on Venglustat. And you can see that really there's no difference between the side effects, whether they were on placebo, taking nothing, or on Venglustat. So this is a very solid foundation to build the concept of SRT to improve brain health in type 3 Gaucher disease. What we also learned from the phase 2 trial is that patients maintained their liver and spleen volumes and blood counts, and there was no real difference over time, although I mentioned to you that the biomarkers improved. And so this was a summary of the data, that at 1 year, Venglustat, when combined with enzyme replacement therapy, we found that Venglustat crosses the blood-brain barrier. It leads to robust reduction of Gaucher lipids in the brain, and it has potential to improve neurological signs of type 3 Gaucher disease. And some of these effects are captured by functional MRI, and the systemic manifestations were stable. And of course, safety, it should be the first and foremost priority. And that came through very nicely, that there were no safety concerns and it was very well tolerated. And this paper was just recently published in the journal Brain. So now we come to the highlight for today. And I know a lot of you have joined us this evening to learn more about the LEAP-2 Mono study. This is a study which is designed to provide the highest level of evidence that a medicine is safe and that it works. And it is what we call double-blind, double-dummy clinical trial, which is global. And let me explain to you what double-blind, double-dummy means. But first of all, consider a person with type 3 Gaucher disease. And I know many of those who have joined us this evening are living in parts of United States or other parts of Americas where there are no other patients with Gaucher disease. You're on your own and you have a dedicated doctor who is really taking good care of you. But Gaucher disease is very complicated. It needs specialists from different specialists who can then take care of different aspects of your Gaucher disease. So taking part in a clinical trial allows you to get expert multidisciplinary evaluation and care. And this is very, very important in order for you to take charge of your Gaucher disease and lead a healthy life. Second, to travel for the clinical trial, all of your travel costs are paid. it allows you the most advanced medicine being evaluated to get it earlier than before it is approved. And it doesn't cost you anything because all of the travel for you and your care provider is covered for the medicine until it is approved in your countries, and all of the testing. And we are a Gaucher community. We are a community of passionate individuals, patients, families, and this is a wonderful way to help each other with our goal, overarching goal, is that the future, the new generation of type 3 Gaucher patients will lead completely healthy life with normal brain health. So this is the double-blind, double-dummy placebo-controlled trial. So we are recruiting, and this trial is in progress already. We are recruiting children from age of 12 to 18, and also adults over the age of 18 years. They have to have a diagnosis of type 3 Gaucher disease, and they have to have enzyme treatment for a period of time, 3 years, 4 years or more, so that they will achieve stable spleen, liver, platelet count, growth parameters, and so on. So their systemic disease or disease in the body is well controlled, but they have signs of type 3 Gaucher disease. We are going to evaluate individuals, and this will lead to our 40 patients. That is the target of the trial. And once they enter the trial, they will be randomized in a way that your doctor will not know what you are on. So there will be individuals who will continue on enzyme, but they will have a placebo or a dummy pill of Venglustat. Others will have infusion of saline, but they will have the active SRT Venglustat. And the infusion bags will be covered in a green bag, so the nurse wouldn't know what it is. Only the pharmacist and the main sponsor would know which bag contains what. And then after 1 year, everybody will switch to just the SRT Venglustat, one pill given in the morning every day. And that is why this is called leap to monotherapy. And this design is built on the foundation of everything that I described to you before, of what we have learned about the concept of SRT. So the key inclusion criteria are stable manifestations of Gaucher disease on enzymes such as liver, spleen, blood counts, and so on, have to have signs of type 3 Gaucher disease, and then should be free of bone disease. So there shouldn't have been a recent bone crisis. And the patient should be stable for at least 1 year by the investigator's determination. And there are some exclusion criteria. So if there is very severe liver disease, we are not enrolling such individuals because these medicines are processed in the liver and we don't know how it will be handled in the setting of liver disease. So once these 40 individuals, 20 will be randomized to continue on enzyme, and they would have placebo Venglustat, and 20 would have the actual pill Venglustat, and they will have just the saline infusion. And nobody would know except the main sponsor what bags are contained. And so patients have no way of guessing whether they are getting the saline or the enzyme or the placebo pill or the active pill. At 1 year, everybody will switch to Venglustat monotherapy. So this is the big picture, and I'm going to go through quite quickly over the next few slides. But if you want to know more about it, you can get in touch with me, or if you just go on the internet and go on clinicaltrials.gov and enter leap to mono, it will take you to all of the detailed information about the trial. So as I mentioned, we are recruiting children from age 12 to 18 with type 3 Gaucher disease, as well as adults over the age of 18. And they have to have some degree of incoordination. So a SARA score, that score for capturing degree of incoordination, should be 1 or above. And they have to have stable signs of blood count and liver and spleen volume. This is an essential criteria. This saccades so that the eye loops upwards in an attempt to look to one side or the other. And this sign is absolutely classical for type 3 Gaucher disease. It is variously called gaze palsy or saccades or oculomotor apraxia. So the primary objective is very new here in the LEAP-2 Mono trial. As you know, many of the trials have looked at platelet count, spleen volume, but what are regulators, and in many ways patients want to know, how is a medicine going to improve my life? And therefore the primary objectives of this trial will be to demonstrate a change in the SARA score, whether the incoordination gets better, and this very sophisticated test called the R-bands screening test, which checks the immediate memory, visuospatial, constructional ability, language, attention, and detailed memory. And this screening test is a wonderful instrument to really capture our brain health in a very refined way, to look at different functioning of different parts of the brain. And so uniquely for a clinical trial in Gaucher disease, we are not looking at biomarkers, MRIs, or whatever. We want to be able, hopefully, to demonstrate an improvement in the symptoms of neurological Gaucher disease that is hindering the functioning of the affected individuals. And there are a number of secondary objectives, such as looking at biomarkers and so on, that are listed here. Safety is very important. That will be checked very rigorously. We will be also looking at a number of biomarkers. I mentioned the neurofilament light chain, lyso-Gl1, chitotriosidase, and so on. Neurofilament light chain. There are other new biomarkers to check on brain health, which will also be checked, and also a number of indicators of bone health will be monitored in this clinical trial. There are other POR endpoints to look at pediatric cognition function, as well as neurological quality of life. We want to assess patient global impression of severity and patient quality of life, and a variety of daily living activity measurements, as well as Vineland adaptive behavior scale, and global impression of severity and overall quality of life. So in this way, we want to demonstrate scientific evidence that the medicine is working, but we are going to a whole new level, that we want to demonstrate that the medicine is truly improving the quality of life of the patients. And in this way, we will develop, my hope is, a medicine that will prevent any type 3 patient from having any neurological damage. We will also continue to look at how the medicine is going into the brain and in plasma, and I already showed you the data. And so this is a global effort on part of the Gaucher community, and I appreciate the International Gaucher Alliance for their support and advocacy to bring attention to type 3 Gaucher disease. And these are the trials that are shown here. In the United States, Dr. Gokar Alpin, Dr. Bernard Guzzoli, my center at Yale are the main centers, but there is also a center in Canada, in Winnipeg, Dr. Greenberg, as well as in Argentina with Dr. Drellickman. And so if anyone is interested, please reach out to one of these sites to discuss the eligibility and opportunity to go to those centers for an evaluation of your type 3 Gaucher disease. So with that, I want to summarize and say that Venglustat phase 2 trial shows that it has a promising response of improving brain health. And phase 3 trial is a double-dummy, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, which is now already recruiting. We are hoping to complete recruitment next year, sometime in the first half. It's a multinational trial. And the design of it really reflects a very high bar that is set by the US FDA and other regulatory authorities, that the days of just testing a medicine in 10 people and then get approval are gone. We really need to do proper systematic assessment as we do for any approved drugs. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and my contact information is given there. But I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Dr. Mistry. We are out of time now, but we wanted to thank you from IGA and from everyone who is here attending this wonderful webinar. Do you want to, sorry if I interrupt you, do you want to say something else?
No, not at all, Paulina. I am sorry I went over my time, but this is my contact information. Anybody can send me an email, and I would be very happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much. And I want to remember you or to tell you that we are going to send a questionnaire for you to please answer this about our webinar. There was a question about Ambroxol, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Mistry, but in my knowledge, if someone is in Ambroxol, this is an exclusion criteria, right? So,
Paulina, it is not an exclusion criteria, except that Ambroxol is what we call the pharmacological chaperone. And so patients have to be off that medicine for at least 6 months before they can enroll. So a patient can undergo evaluation, and if they are qualified, they have to stay off the medicine for 6 months.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other question is this trial only in the USA?
No, this is worldwide. It is in USA, it is in Canada, it is in LATAM, in Argentina, it's in Europe, as well as in China. So we want patients around the world to have an opportunity to participate in this trial, and along the way get the best care that you should be getting for Gaucher disease.
Okie dokie. Well, time is over. Thank you very much again for you, Dr. Pram. Thank you everyone for attending.